Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on the 7th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information around Alaska, and you can do that a lot of different ways. One of the easiest ways is to use the Alaska Weather Information Line. 1-800-472-0391 is a number that you should just write down next to your phone, whether you're going out on the boat, going out on the plane, or just want to check the weather to walk across town. This is an easy way to do it. Weather.gov/Alaska, of course, is our website. And if you can't find what you're looking for there, feel free to email me anytime at david.snider@noaa.gov. Happy to help as I can. Here's a look at our weather and the hazards that we see for the rest of tonight and really going through about Friday and into Saturday. A lot of red on the map, which indicates a warning level or the most severe levels that we have for weather across Alaska. And then the yellow areas are advisory, so a little bit of a lower threshold for those warnings. Still an alert level, something you should take action on, but maybe not quite as bad as what we see with the red here. But I'm going to start with the yellow area tonight because I think it's really important, so pay attention to this. If you're around Bethel and the Kuskokwim Delta area tonight, we are seeing rain, and you know that if you're in Bethel already, obviously, but it is raining on top of the ice is melting. And we think that not only could there be some minor flooding in your area, and we've had reports of this in Bethel already today, but the rain falling on the snow and the rain falling on the ice is going to make a tricky situation to get around on. It means that if you were trying to get across the river or up the river, it might not be such a good decision tonight and tomorrow. And there could be some minor flooding because of the melting going on, because of the warmth, and because of the rain on the ice. So be careful out there. A flood advisory is in effect until 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and we think we're going to have plenty more rain on top of your area as we go through that period there. So this is a very warm and wet storm, and it's a little bit unusual because of that, and that's why we're saying a flood advisory for Bethel until 3 o'clock on Friday. So a little bit of a different winter event here for you, but take that to heart. Be careful out there, and as you see flooding, we would like to know about it. So however you like to message us on Facebook or on Twitter, feel free to do that, or you can file a storm report using our website at weather.gov/Anchorage. Since we're talking about advisories, let's just go on up toward the Denali area. Wind advisory there is in effect tonight into tomorrow, gusts to about 35-40 miles per hour there, so a little bit more than breezy, perhaps, if you're driving through the pass there just north of Denali. Everywhere else in red is a warning, with one exception. We have a blizzard warning here for the Brooks Range. As you're driving along the Dalton Highway and west, you're bound to run into some stronger winds and at least a little bit of snow, 2 to 7 inches there on the northern side, a little bit more on the south side. And chances are you're going to run into things that are going to slow you down. So if you're heading toward the Dalton Highway or you're getting ready to head south along the Dalton, you already know the weather's bad if you're on the north slope and heading south, but if you're southward going northbound, you're going to run into some particularly nasty weather along the highway passes there, especially as you go forward. So be careful, plan to go slow, and learn to return for sure. Out across the west, we've got winter storm warnings there for all the areas in red. And what this means is we are expecting sizable amounts of snow, at least 1 to 3, 1 to 4 inches of snow, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but we do expect to have some wind in just about every one of these areas. And on top of that, remember we were talking about rain here. Well, it's still going to rain as this moves northward, but it's going to transition to snow, or at least have some snow on the front side. The problem is that there's going to be at least some rain or sleet mixed in with that, and as that happens, that's going to make things slick where you are. So it's not just snow, it's rain and snow moving your way and moving north and east. So in some places, we're going to get a little more snow than everywhere else. I said about in general, about 1 to 3, maybe as much as 6 in some cases. Some other areas here in the Kobuk and Noatak Valley region, we're probably going to talk about 6 to 15 inches of snow. So Ambler, you might get a good dumping of snow there, maybe more than a foot in some cases, all the way along the southeastern Brooks Range where we could see about 10 to 15 inches of snow. So this region here, right up against the Brooks Range, is really going to get hammered with a decent amount of snowfall there. Everywhere else, probably about 2 to 4, 2 to 5 inches of snow, but you're still talking about, especially in the Koyukuk Valley here, all the way down to the Yukon, you're talking about rainfall and maybe freezing on contact as freezing rain, but also mixing it with snow. So we've really got a complicated weather situation here, and that goes out toward St. Lawrence Island as well, a very warm and wet situation. Now, the other thing we're watching, and this is not an issue yet, but one thing that we are watching, we're going to talk about quickly when we look at the ice forecast in a little bit, is southwestern Alaska. A lot of this ice here has been melting and moving northward because of that strong southerly flow. While we don't have a coastal flooding or high surf issue yet, as that shorefast ice potentially moves, that could be a situation that develops. So we're watchful of that, and as you have reports of what that shorefast ice is doing, let us know, because that will be important for the National Weather Service to advise folks across Southwest that we see problems coming up with the wind and the ice that is there or isn't there anymore. Out across the west, one sign that we have a developing a stronger system here across Southwest is a hurricane or a high wind warning. Hurricane force wind warnings have been out across the western and southern Bering today, and this storm is still moving north and east. So this is going to be really the rest of the week, early week kind of pattern as we get into the weekend and early next week. A deep southerly flow will keep pushing into western Alaska. So here's the satellite picture. Snow is moving out of southeast today. The sky is clearing up there slowly and surely. But what you can see out in the west is a very pronounced sharp line. That is a frontal boundary working through the Pribilofs and into western Alaska, feeding into an area of low pressure here across eastern Asia and Russia. This is pulling in a deep fetch of southerly wind and very warm and wet air working into west and southwestern Alaska and overtaking a good chunk of the western interior and the Brooks Range and the North Slope. Out west, you can see another area of low pressure here, not as well defined on the satellite's perspective right now, but we assure you that surface pressures there are deepening rapidly, and the winds have been coming up around the western parts of the Aleutians, and again, hurricane force wind warnings have been posted for many of the marine areas surrounding the western chain. As we look at the surface chart, the low's down to 958 millibars there. This trough will swing into western Alaska as we go through the rest of the week and into early next weekend. But for now, the main issue is the cold front that's working its way toward western Alaska. And yes, there is rain falling across southwest right now, so that's where the flood advisory is coming from. Periods of moderate to occasionally heavy snow up across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys as waves of warm air work their way northward. High pressure is chipping away at the clouds of the Gulf. You can see a trough of low pressure here sitting across the north and eastern sections of the Gulf. And colder air is poised and ready out in the west, but it's really not going to move too much. It looks like this pattern will be focused on the continuation of warm air pumping into western Alaska. So tonight, periods of rain and freezing rain are certainly possible across the lower terrain in the valleys from the Yukon all the way up through the Koyukuk. For parts of the Yukon Delta and the Seward Peninsula, it primarily will be snow. As you get eastward into the Brooks Range, that too will be snow, heavier snow at times. And you'll notice the packing of the pressure gradients. I always like to point that out. It's a really good indication that we're going to have some gusty winds blowing through that region. And for some of our mountain passes, especially along the Dalton Highway, and for our aviators trying to get through Atigan and Anaktuvik Pass, consider the turbulence there. It could be pretty nasty, as well as visibilities and ceilings not so nice. Cold front up across the north and west really doesn't make any big surge eastward. You can see the stationary boundary shifts eastward just a little bit, but that colder air just doesn't come plowing southward anytime soon. What happens is that moisture is feeding up into that same vicinity, and that warmest air may drift a little bit eastward toward Iliamna and the Alaska Range and probably into the southern interior. But the main focus for rainfall will still be here across southwestern Alaska and the southern interior. Southeast, you may get some clouds tomorrow, but overall it looks like breezy conditions there around Skagway perhaps, but nothing too substantial for your weather on Friday with high pressure parked out across the Gulf, 1,038 millibars there. Deepening low, getting deeper, 956 millibars there in the western Bering, and the front just plowing through the central and western chain. A brief area of ridging shaping up across the Yukon Delta down toward the eastern chain on Friday, but as we get into Saturday, you can see it matters not. The front plows into western Alaska, and we are still in that deep southerly flow in the same old places as we get into Saturday. We've got a kind of a resurgence of low pressure here across the eastern chain. That's feeding in that warm, wet air into southwest. Again, the Yukon and the Kuskokwim Delta under the sights of that very warm and wet pattern. And northward, still warm, still wet, still windy, but more likely that we're going to at least see some wet snow there for the Kobuk and Noatak southward through Kotzebue and into Unalakleet and Nome for that matter. Out west, the low pressure system is filling in, but you can see a pretty broad westerly fetch coming in. Each one of these systems is chewing up and helping to melt any remaining shore-fast ice there in southwest. So while it's not gone, it's certainly something that we're watching very carefully, and this is why. Every time one of these waves comes through, it's going to have the opportunity anyway to make a little bit more of a high surf situation there. So we want to keep watch on that, and for right now the ice is in a good position to do what it needs to do. But if that's not the case, we would really like to know, so please do let us know. In southeast, generally clearing conditions there for Saturday, a little less wind, maybe still breezy in the northern Lynn Canal, and some spottier snow showers across the interior, and gusty winds up here across some of our northern passes. But generally speaking, the main weather show is out in the west as we head into the weekend. Let's take a look at temperatures for Friday morning. 20s to about 30 degrees for some of the outer coast readings there in southeast. Haines and Skagway in the low 20s, down toward Craig and Metlakatla. Temps there back in the mid-20s. Prince William Sound looking at lows below freezing, mid to upper 20s there. Cook Inlet temperatures in the mid to upper 20s. Kenai about 25, 34 in Kodiak. And we're looking at about 13 in Fairbanks, warm, 5 in Fort Yukon, and 16 for Utqiagvik, 24 for Kotzebue, 27 in Nome, and temps in southwest anywhere from about freezing in Bethel, or just above it, to almost 40 degrees around King Salmon and Dillingham. Dutch Harbor in Alaska about 35, St. Paul 32, a high of 36 there on Friday. Nome up to 30 degrees on Friday afternoon, close to freezing in Fairbanks. South of that, well, you can see Denali closer to 43, and temps above freezing for South Central, 43 in Kodiak, 20s to mid-30s for Southeast. North Slope temperatures back in the mid to upper 20s there. Overnight lows on Saturday. Single digits for Eagle, 9 below for Northway. Teens for Fairbanks and mild, mid-20s for South Central and Cook Inlet. Homer about 29. 26 in McGrath. Temps in southwest in the mid to upper 30s. 28 in Nome. Utqiagvik looking at 8 above. High temperatures there at 15. Southwest in the lower 40s as we go into Saturday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to aviation weather now. A stationary boundary across the south and west coast will channel moisture up the entire west coast of Alaska. Warmer air is working northward, and that will add more moisture to parts of the interior. You'll see that in the form of fog in the morning, as well as low ceilings across many locations. Across the Gulf, look for widespread MVFR, some improvement across southeastern Alaska as we get into your Friday morning. Out west, IFR conditions are expected to continue. You can see that moving eastward with the next wave. Not quite to St. Paul, St. George, or St. Matthew by the afternoon, but visibility and ceilings will be dropping into the central chain. West of the Shumagins to, well, just about to Unimak Pass. You can see IFR conditions there on that southerly flow, and some of that spreading inland from Cape Newenham all the way into parts of the interior and generally west of Tanana up toward the Chukchi coast. And MVFR pulls away a little bit from the northern and eastern Gulf Coast, still leaving southeast and a good chunk of the northern Gulf with VFR. For Saturday morning, watch for IFR spreading into the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, all the way to Nome, and southward toward Amonuk and Nunivak Island. MVFR will be fairly widespread across most of the Bering Sea, and for areas across the Chugach and a large part of the Alaska Range down into Cook Inlet. IFR hit and miss across some of your favorite Alaska Range passes, and also looking for IFR across the Chukchi coast into parts of Kotzebue Sound. Southeast, Northern Gulf, still looking pretty good for Saturday morning, and that should continue into the afternoon. The next wave will work ashore into Saturday afternoon with IFR from the Chukchi coast into the upper end of Kotzebue Sound, Kobuk and Noatak valleys through the YK Delta, and into southwestern Alaska with MVFR just about everywhere else except for southeast and the northeastern parts of the Brooks Range. Here's your pass conditions in detail now for your day tomorrow. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass we expect to be locked in with IFR conditions most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should lean over toward IFR as we go through your Friday. It started at MVFR as expected. For Rainy Pass, look for IFR conditions most of the day. A little bit better there in Windy Pass with a start at marginal levels there with improvement to VFR as we go. Isabel Pass also looking for some of that improvement to work its way eastward into the Isabel Pass range, especially on the south side. VFR is expected there. VFR expected for Mentasta Pass as we go, and probably leaning that way for Tanita Pass as we get into your afternoon. Portage Pass right now looks to be VFR, and Chilkoot White Pass Friday looking pretty good. VFR conditions expected there. Freezing levels with a pretty stout and robust southerly flow. No wonder we're seeing freezing levels climb to anywhere from 2 to as high as 6,000 feet across the Tanana Valley, and 2 to 6,000 feet south and east of Kodiak Island and generally offshore of southeastern Alaska. So a lot of warm and wet air there, and every surge will continue that trend of warming things up. Icing potential is also present around a large part of Alaska, levels anywhere from 6, 7 to 8, and even 9,000 feet across the region. The one thing you're going to have to keep in mind is that with this southerly flow coming up the west coast, we are actually seeing some widespread areas of freezing rain across the south and west. So as temperatures drop and you're getting into rainfall events across the west, that could add some significant and certainly isolated severe icing in your area. So be mindful of the weather at hand at the surface, not just aloft. At 10,000 feet, we see another round of icing move in with a next wave coming in from the central and western chain. Most areas here are at least looking at isolated moderate, and we probably do have some spotty areas of considerable moderate considering the weather. The jet stream right now has a pretty broad area of high pressure sitting across the Gulf, and that is leading to a pretty strong southerly flow coming up the west coast at around 115 knots, but also a descending area of north to south moving air across the Gulf of Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. That's running around 100 knots right there, and this is keeping the Pacific Northwest really unsettled with frequent rounds of snow in the last week or so. But still driving all of this is a broad westerly flow coming across the North Pacific, just digging in there across the Bering with a pretty active flow, 150 to 160 knots driving all of that. At 9,000 feet, you can see the southerly winds working up the west coast, anywhere from 40 to 50 knots sustained. North and westerlies coming down through southeastern Alaska, high pressure centered up over the Gulf. At 3,000 feet, again, winds really don't let off here. 40 to 50 knot winds should be expected across most of the west. High pressures over the Gulf with a little bit more of a south and westerly flow moving into the interior of Alaska. Northwesterlies for southeast and broad westerlies coming in through the chain, again 50 to 60 knots. So no surprise, turbulence is a big factor in the forecast today. Below 3,000 feet around a large part of the Bering Strait, 8,000 feet across the Brooks Range with some isolated severe as you approach the range. South and west below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate widespread over Bristol Bay and into the Alaska Peninsula. And then out across the central and western chain below 4,000 feet with hurricane force winds expected out there today.
Sunrise Planet Fest.
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky. If you're a morning person like James over there, then have we got some planet watching in store for you.
That's right, Dehne. All this week, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn are all visible before sunrise. And on the morning of February 18th, Venus and Saturn will be having a...
Oh no, not again!
A conjunction!
There he goes again, folks. So, while he's getting his groove on, we'll tell you a little bit about these three wandering lights in the sky.
Okay, we have our skies set up for the early part of this week, about an hour before sunrise, facing southeast. About a third of the way up in the southeastern sky, you'll see three bright lights. The brightest of them is the planet Venus.
The other two are the largest planets in our solar system. The one on the right of Venus is the giant planet Jupiter, and the dimmer light on the left is the ring planet Saturn.
Venus has been in the morning sky now for a few months, and if you're the type who likes to walk their dog or go jogging early in the morning, you've been seeing Venus gracing the pre-dawn sky.
Venus is a beautiful planet from a distance. However, that beauty is deceiving. First off, Venus is so bright because it's completely covered with clouds. Those clouds reflect almost 70% of the sunlight striking Venus, so the planet appears super bright in our earthly skies.
Those clouds, though, are toxic. Instead of being made of water like our clouds, the clouds of Venus are made of droplets of sulfuric acid. The acid is so strong that it destroyed the first space probe that tried to land on Venus.
And if that wasn't bad enough, Venus's atmosphere is very dense and is mostly composed of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, water vapor, and methane are potent greenhouse gases. If you have a little bit of them in your planet's atmosphere and you're the right distance from the sun, you'll be comfortable.
However, If you have too much carbon dioxide and are too close to the sun, like Venus, you'll overheat. Venus is suffering from a runaway greenhouse effect. Not only is the surface temperature over 850 degrees Fahrenheit, but the atmospheric pressure at the surface is a crushing 1,300 pounds per square inch. And trust me, it's not comfortable.
The other two planets are the gas giants Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is 5.8 astronomical units away from us this week. That's almost 6 times as far away from us as the Sun. Saturn, on the other hand, is almost 11 astronomical units away from us. In miles, that's a little over 1 billion miles. Even at those extreme distances, those planets appear bright because they're physically very large.
That's right, Dehne. Jupiter is the largest at almost 88,000 miles in diameter. That's so big that you could put almost 1,300 Earths inside it. Saturn, although smaller, is no slouch. Saturn is over 72,000 miles in diameter and is over 750 times the volume of the Earth.
Not only are Jupiter and Saturn the largest planets in our solar system, they also have the most moons. Collectively, they have 141 moons at current count. Jupiter has a whopping 79 moons and Saturn has an impressive 62 moons.
Speaking of Saturn, let's check out that conjunction next week.
Okay, we have our skies set up for the end of this week, facing southeast. Among the stars of Sagittarius the Centaur, you'll see the 3 bright lights that are Saturn, Venus, and Jupiter.
As the days pass, you'll notice Saturn inching closer and closer to Venus. Let's jump ahead 2 days at a time. Here's where they'll be on February 12th, 14th, 16th, and finally on February 18th, Venus and Saturn will be only 2 full moon widths apart, or just a little over 1 degree of separation in the sky. Wow.
So there you have it, a pre-dawn conjunction of Venus and Saturn that you don't want to miss.
While the king of the planets, Jupiter, watches from a safe distance.
Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And onto your sea ice analysis for the day. You'll notice we're looking at the Kuskokwim Delta here, and southwest we've seen a lot of changes here across that southern edge of the ice around Nunivak Island up towards St. Matthew and north towards St. Lawrence Island. A lot of areas now with marginal ice. We've had some offshore flow. We've also had some opening of the water where the ice is just not there anymore. Some of those places north of Shishmaref there. Thanks to Dennis for that report on Instagram. We appreciate that. And we'd appreciate seeing any pictures that you have across the Yukon Delta coastline from Makorik all the way down toward Bethel. We know there are a lot of changes there, and as of this point, you can see that there's considerably more marginal ice than just this time yesterday. So due diligence, be careful out there. I would not trust shore-fast ice in many locations right now. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the very latest ice information and the outlook. Here's a look at southeast and northerly winds coming down the inside passage, 25 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas there, northeasterlies in Clarence Strait. North and northwesterlies coming down the outer coast, not too bad, 15 to 20 knots, and you're looking at about 7 to 8 foot seas, 9 foot seas outside of Craig, and 15 knots coming in from the west across the northern parts of the Gulf there. 7 foot seas. Notice though the winds kind of shift direction there on Saturday, blowing in from the east now across the outer coast. A little more variable, 10 to 15 knots, so we're looking about 8 to 9 feet. On the inside, northerlies at 15 with 3 foot seas for Saturday. As you get into Friday, Prince William Sound, westerlies, 10 knots, 2 foot seas, generally a westerly flow across the northern Gulf outside of Resurrection Bay. South and southeasterly winds coming into the Barrens, 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas there, and a light northeast wind coming down Cook Inlet, 10 to 15, 1 to about 3 foot seas. On Saturday, not a whole lot of change in the northern parts of Cook Inlet. You can see the wind still coming in from the south and east over the Barrens, 15 to 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas in the region still. A little bit more of a variable flow outside of Prince William Sound. Winds and seas still small and light. The southwesterlies again about 10 to 15 with 5 to 7 foot seas there on Saturday. For southwest, over the ice now, or what's left of it across southwest, The southerlies 15 knots, 4-foot seas. Northeasterlies down the Alaska Peninsula coastline and the Bering 20 knots there, and 20 to 25 knots across parts of the North and Western Gulf. Inside Chillicothe Strait, 3-foot seas on Friday. That goes down to about 2 feet on Saturday with a southeast wind up to 15. South and southwesterlies are building in. You can see higher winds and seas out in the west, of course. 20 to 25 with 9 to 10-foot seas, maybe up to 11-foot seas as you get up toward Castle Cape and Chignik for your Saturday. Now down toward the Aleutians, a much different story. Hurricane force winds possible in the region there. You'll see many marine alerts as a result of that, west of Adak especially. 40, 50, even 65 knots there. You're looking at 40-foot seas. Through Unamak Pass in the region, you're looking at about 20 knots with 9 to 12-foot seas. So probably safe harbor anything east of Adak at this point for Friday. As we get into Saturday, you can see the higher winds and seas move north. The center of this is probably 30 to 40 feet again, so the worst of that is moving quickly north, but we still got some strong winds and certainly some high seas from Kiska to Adak and even westward towards Shemya, anywhere from 20 to 26 footers with 35 to 40 knot winds. West and southwesterlies through the central and eastern chain, and about 14 to 16 foot seas on the south and east side of that storm as that is moving north. Now, for places like St. Matthew, southeasterlies at 50 knots and 18-foot seas are possible for the west coast there as we get into Friday afternoon. St. Paul, St. George, going to miss out on at least a little bit of that, but still expecting 30 knots and 11-foot seas. Southerlies coming up the west coast anywhere from 15 to 30 knots, and some of that making it over the ice. But again, that ice edge is going to continue to change as we go through the rest of the weekend. As we get into Saturday, southerlies down to St. Matthew at 40 knots with 35-foot seas. Southwesterlies over the Pribilofs at 20 knots, 18-foot seas there, and 8 to 9-foot seas along the ice edge, 30 to 35 knots coming in from the south. Southeasterlies over Norton Sound, and south and southwesterlies over the north slope from the Beaufort Seacoast at 25 to 30. For the Chukchi Coast, 20 to 25. For Saturday, stronger winds west of Point Hope, 35 to 40 knots there from the south and southeast. And a little bit of a change up north. You'll notice more of a southeasterly flow, 20 to 25 from Prudhoe Bay and west, but Kaktovik, you're looking at westerlies at 30. Remember, tonight we were talking about a whole smattering of winter storm warnings and one flood advisory for the Kuskokwim Delta because it was raining. There was some minor flooding in Bethel, and there is going to be rain and snow melt on top of the ice that you have. So be careful, it's going to be slick and there will probably be flooding, and it is going to reduce the quality of any ice that's out there. Be careful as you travel. Out across the north, periods of heavy snow will be possible, especially from the Kobuk, Noatak valleys eastward toward the southeastern Brooks Range. Snowfall amounts there may total more than a foot. Hurricane force wind warnings out across the west there, or the marine areas anyway, and high wind warnings for Shemya. As that front moves westward, rain and snow will continue along the west coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.